Okay, good evening, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as we talk about WorldTeach, our program in Colombia. Again, thanks so much for holding. My name is Brooke. I am the Director of Recruitment here at WorldTeach, but much more importantly, I am a returned volunteer from Colombia last year. So I will get more into myself and our panelists on the line. I just kind of want to quickly introduce all of you guys out there. We have almost 50 people signed up to listen to us this evening. So that's some panelists from Colombia and also here in the States, and our volunteers that are hoping to join us next year, people that have just started their application, others that are just kind of looking to learn more about whether it's WorldTeach or Colombia specifically. So we're going to get started. I'll let you all know once again that you are muted. If you have a question or concern, you can either chat it in or kind of raise your hand and I can address it. So let us know, and otherwise we're going to go for it. So thanks again for joining us, you guys. We're super excited to talk about Colombia, the best country absolutely in the world. So first, we're going to go through the agenda here. So we're going to spend a couple minutes meeting our panelists that, as I mentioned, are joining us from Colombia and also here in the States. We're going to learn a bit about their backgrounds and how they ended up joining WorldTeach. Then we're going to provide a bit of an overview of the organization before jumping into the specifics of our Colombia program, including our partnership with Volunteers Colombia and also their Ministry of Education and why there's a need for our volunteers there. Afterwards, we're going to be discussing living in Colombia. So what are the housing placements like? Whom will you be living with? What is the monthly stipend? How do our volunteers get involved in the community outside of the classroom? And this is when we're going to speak with our panelists about their actual experiences. We'll also be addressing safety in Colombia because I know that that's a question a lot of people had. From there, we'll talk a bit about teaching in the classroom in Colombia. So what is their educational system like in general? Focusing on what the major cultural challenges will be that you might face, and then certain resources that you will or won't have, and how those placements are actually made. And then we'll spend a brief minute talking about the application process for those that are still in the process of that. And again, during which we're open to questions. So if you have any questions, type them in. Otherwise, we'll have some Q&A time at the end for our panelists. Okay, this is me. That's a picture of me last year in Colombia with my 6th graders. So you will see, judging by my bio, I do not like 8th and 9th graders. I do, however, love younger kids and a bit older. So here I am. I was teaching last year in Bogota, actually kind of right outside the city. I had graduated from Emory with a degree in journalism and sociology, so I was not a teacher. I was not fluent in Spanish, but yet I joined WorldTeach, and I haven't looked back. So moving on, because you'll be hearing lots of me, I want to go to our panelists. So joining us first is Bridget. She is our Assistant Field Director, currently down in Barranquilla. So that's where we hear this street noise. Bridget, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Bridget. I was a volunteer, as you can see, in 2012, and I've been the Assistant Field Director ever since. So I started off in Bogota, just outside, in another small town. And then I moved to the coast, which is extremely different, but I love both places.
Awesome. And so, Bridget, do you remember how you first found WorldTeach and why you decided to join WorldTeach, and specifically why Colombia?
WorldTeach I had heard of through a friend who was, she was volunteering in Ecuador, and she actually ended up staying there for about 3 or 4 years, which is funny now. And Colombia specifically, I just wanted to do something different. I wanted to go somewhere new, and it kind of jumped out at me and seemed like a good idea. And people ask me that all the time, like, why did you come to Colombia? Why did you come to Colombia? And I honestly don't remember, but I can tell them I don't know why I came here, but I know why I don't want to leave.
That's a great answer. Fantastic. Thank you. So when I was a volunteer there, Bridget was my assistant field director. And as we go on to our next panelist, Maria Antonia Montes, also a good friend of mine and one of my fellow volunteers as well. So Maria, please introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Maria Antonia. As you can see, I was a volunteer in 2013 and I worked as a university professor in Bogota, which was wonderful. I loved being a professor and having my own classroom and also having much older students. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and while I was in Colombia, I decided to get a master's in conflict resolution. So I was both teaching and studying while I was a volunteer.
Which is a little crazy, but very admirable.
Yes.
Okay, so same question for you. Do you remember how you first came across WorldTeach and why you decided that that was the way to go?
I came across WorldTeach because a friend of mine had mentioned it in conversation. She was looking to go abroad and have a teaching experience, and I was looking forward to the same thing. At the time, I thought I was going to be kind of luxurious and go to Italy to do this, but when I looked into WorldTeach, I noticed that they didn't have an Italy program, but they certainly had one in Colombia. Both of my parents are from native to Colombia, and I still have family there, so it seemed like a really meaningful opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah, we definitely don't have a program in Italy. Actually, on that note, you'll see here through our mission statement kind of what WorldTeach is accomplishing and working towards every single day. And it's definitely more in, underserved communities. So kind of a quick introduction to WorldTeach. We originally started as a student-led organization at Harvard University back in 1986, but we're now our own nonprofit. We have over 7,000 alumni, and we're currently in 16 countries, the number one being Colombia, of course. And so our mission statement, which you can see here, explains it a bit further. So we're doing work for the community, of course, where we are serving, but also absolutely for the volunteer. So WorldTeach partners with governments. It's usually the Ministry of Education and sometimes other NGOs or other organizations in low and middle income countries to provide volunteer teachers to meet local needs and promote responsible global citizenship. So, it's kind of a bit professional sounding, but that's absolutely what we're doing. It's number one for the community, and equally important is what the volunteer is experiencing as well. This picture here is one of my photos that I took at my school last year, Colombia Tierra Querida. I think that speaks for itself. They value their land like no other people I have ever encountered. This also is a great representation of the school structures that you might come across next year. You'll see that the roof, or el techo, is not fully closed, and it's not hot in every part of Colombia, so be careful. Do your research before you go. Bogota is very, very cold, and the wind and rain go right through it, right through that techo. Okay, moving on. This is something obviously very, very important, and I like to address this right away because this is money, this is your support, this is your success, this is everything. So support for the volunteer and the volunteer fee. So, as you probably already saw on our website, there is a volunteer fee, and why is that? So first, it's important to note that Volunteers Colombia, that is one of our major partners down there, and also the Ministry of Education, they are the ones that are subsidizing the program substantially. As you see, it could be over $10,000 for a volunteer, but they provide the majority of the funding, and then the volunteer pays the remainder, which is, as you see, $1,250 plus airfare. It's very important to note that the airfare is not included in that cost. What is included in that fee is all of the below. So you see your visa, your housing, your monthly stipend, which is approximately $300, though that definitely fluctuates. Your field staff like Bridget, and also the field director, her name is Jess, but she's not on the line at the moment. Our health and emergency evacuation, which is definitely important. training, which we will get into more in depth in a couple moments, and then additional things, transportation when you're in the country, going to training sites, etc. So this is important to know. This money is going to you, to your support in the field. It's going back to you in the form of your monthly stipend, and it does not cover your airfare. So a lot of our volunteers do pretty heavy fundraising. It's actually, our Colombia program is one of our strongest supported financially supported programs, meaning a lot of our other countries are much more expensive. We get very little support from the in-country partner, whereas Volunteers Colombia and the Ministry of Education in Colombia, they're so dedicated to having us there that they give us essentially everything. I wish it was absolutely everything. I wish it was a fully funded program, but we're as close to that as possible. So it's important to note we are there because of Volunteers Colombia and because of the ministry. We would not be there without their invitation and without their financial support. All right, so let me just see here. I've got a question from a listener, but I will address that as we go on. So I'm just going to continue here so we can get to the good stuff and get some feedback from our panelists, from Bridget and Maria Antonia. Okay, so again, why are we in Colombia? Why is there a need for us? So some of you have probably heard of Colombia in the past, couple years and how it's changed drastically in their economy and safety and all of that. But there's definitely a still need, and so let me address that. So while Colombia has, I'd say, probably one of the strongest economies in South America and prestigious universities and all of that, there's also extremely poor schools where instructors are teaching English, but they don't even speak the language. In general, as I wrote there, the level of English proficiency is pretty low, even amongst English teachers. And this is what I can speak to personally. So I realized last year I was at the school where I was placed because the co-teachers that I was working with, they needed my help. So there was one Colombian English teacher. She had tried to study English abroad in the States. She had been accepted into a university, had secured housing, had done fundraising for all of this because obviously it's a huge investment, and the government, the U.S. government, would not approve her visa. So the reality is that, until recently, there were few foreigners visiting Colombia, and historically Colombians face huge difficulty in securing visas just to visit other countries, let alone to work there, live there, or study there. So, native English speaking skills are very rare and very valuable, and we're definitely helping with that. And I think every alum on the line can speak to that level of English, especially amongst the teachers that they worked with. So we'll get into that as we go on. But so on the right, you'll see that we were first invited, as I mentioned, by Volunteers Colombia, which is an NGO down in Colombia, to send just 5 volunteers to Isla Bardu back in 2009. So that's just 5 volunteers. To put it in perspective, last year when Maria Antonia and I were volunteers, there were over 40 of us. So every year, schools kept asking for additional volunteers, which is amazing because, again, we're just looking to help in the schools and the communities that need us, that are requesting us, and that are even paying for us. So they're supporting this whole thing. So last year when we were there, the Colombian president, Manuel Santos, invited us to the presidential palace, and you'll see that picture right below. It's on the right corner. That is our entire group, and Bridget's in there as well, I believe. We're all in there, and including the president. And so they were the ones saying, this program is great. You guys are growing. We want it to grow even further. We want 200 volunteers the next year. We're going to continue to give you additional funding. We recognize the importance of English fluency in this country. We want to improve it, and we need your help. So that was a huge moment for us, for WorldTeach. It's definitely pushed the program to be the largest in our in everything that WorldTeach does. So we're not sending 200 volunteers because WorldTeach is very small, but this year we sent about 70 people, and we'll continue to do that next year as well. And that's split up into 2 departures, one in January and one in June as well. All right, moving on. So this is the good stuff. Actually living in Colombia. We're not even in the classroom yet. I just want to focus on, what is your life going to be like there? Where are you going to live? Where are you going to teach? This is your life. This is not just a trip. This is not vacation. When you come back and people say, how was your trip? You can tell them that they just don't get it. They don't get it. It changes everything. It might just be a year. It might end up being more, but it changes you, I'd say, almost forever. So I want to quickly say that the majority of our placements for January will be in Bogota and the surrounding pueblos or towns right outside of Bogota. There will be a couple placements in Medellin, a few in Isla Bardu, and Barranquilla. So we have a good mix of rural and urban placements. Sometimes those placements will be with a host family. Other times it will be just like a Colombian roommate or 2 roommates, kind of less of a traditional host family sense. But still, they could be your family if that's what you're looking for, if that's what you create. It's definitely what you put in is what you get out. And also in Isla Bardu, we have teacher apartments that are provided by the school, like right on school grounds. So you will be living with other volunteers. So I'm sure you're wondering, like, how do I know what my placement will be? When will I find this out? So if and when you're accepted, you fill out a volunteer profile form where you list your preferences on, what age students you want to teach, what sort of environment you want to live in, whether it's rural, urban, do you want to live near other volunteers, or do you want to be further away from them? Are you looking for that host family experience, or is that not something you're interested in? So you fill out that form, and then based off of your preferences and experiences, the field directors, they place you accordingly to where they think that you'll be the most successful. So you find out this placement. Bridget, is it safe to say perhaps like a couple weeks before departure?
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of weeks. You're always going to get your placements later than you want to.
Absolutely.
But we try to give you enough time to pack.
Yes, because the different regions of the country vary tremendously, which we'll get into later. And you definitely kind of want to know if you're heading to a hot tropical region or a cold mountainous area. But it's very important to note that these placements require a lot of flexibility. You might not find out as soon as you want to, as Bridget just said, and it might not be exactly where you thought you wanted to be. I personally wanted to be in Medellin. I had heard amazing things about the city. I wanted that beautiful weather. I got Bogota, and it is cold in Bogota. But I definitely realized that it was where I was supposed to be for many, many reasons. You just have to have the patience and the flexibility to find that out on your own. So we can talk more about that later as well. All right, so I want to get into actual placements. Maria Antonia, I know you had a bit of a shift at the beginning, but I was wondering if you could give us kind of a picture as to what your housing situation was, what it ended up being later on, what sort of amenities you did have or didn't have.
Sure. So when I got to Colombia, I was placed with a couple in an apartment complex. I didn't know them, obviously. It's kind of low strata housing, usually where you're placed, but I mean, it's very dependent on a lot of different factors. But basically, my couple was never really around, and I was actually one of the only volunteers that didn't have an internet connection. That doesn't happen anymore, but at the time I was one of the only ones. So I was feeling a little isolated and a little bit about kind of by myself. So I made the decision to talk to my field director and to Volunteers Colombia to kind of change my situation. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a family in Colombia, so fortunately I was able to move in with an aunt. So I was one of the few who ended up changing their living situation because of just different factors, but that's really, I was kind of one of a few people who had to do that.
Yeah, but it's a really good, it's a good aspect to bring up because as I mentioned with flexibility, these things change. We are in a country that does everything at the very last minute, and especially when housing is concerned with, let's say, 30, 40 people at a time, sometimes things do change at the last minute. And so you end up in one place and you might not be perfectly happy. You work through it the way Maria Antonia did. And eventually if you find out you're still not happy, you're not comfortable, this is not where you want to be living, that's when you work with the field director. Now, it definitely is a case-by-case situation. I am very, very fortunate that I was placed with a host family that I connected to. They are extremely important to me. I will be going back in December to visit them for Christmas. But you have to put a lot of work into that, whether it's other roommates or an entire family. It's just like whether you're living in the States or in Canada and you have your roommates, you have to treat them with respect, and you can hope that they do the same to you. Especially for that immersion factor, it is the absolute best. But it can definitely be hard work as well. And as Maria Antonia mentioned, she did not have internet. Sometimes that happens. Usually you will have internet, especially in the major cities. But Bridget, I was wondering if you could address those sorts of amenities on the coast, because especially places like Isla Bardu, I know things like even running water or internet could be much more varied or just less common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Peru is an exception because the teachers live on campus, and they have water, they have electricity, they have internet. It just doesn't always all happen at the same time. Here on the coast, I'd say water goes out at least once a week, just for a few hours. It shuts off for whatever reason. The electricity will go out for a few hours for no reason, and sometimes your internet goes down too. But everyone here in Barranquilla, for the most part, lives with what I call host families. The people that live with roommates, they're not roommates the way we think of them in the States. Here, someone's roommate might be like a 35-year-old young professional woman, or I know one volunteer has an older married couple. Like, she has host parents, but she calls them her roommates. So it's not necessarily some young Colombians, because most of them still live with their parents. So the culture's a little different, but everyone will get placed in a home. You get your own bedroom with a bed, a fan, a closet, a place to put your clothes, access to the kitchen, access to a bathroom. Internet, we do our best to have internet connections. Whether or not it's always on is, up in the air. But yeah, I think most people are quite happy and comfortable with their host families here. They're not going to be the fanciest apartments. They're pretty humble. But here, everyone is just so kind and really nice. Like you said, you get what you put into it. Some people become very close with their host families and their roommates, and some people just sort of have a friendly relationship, but a little more distant throughout the year.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to go back to Maria Antonia. So I want to know, again, we haven't started talking about school yet. I'm still focused on, how are you actually making a life for yourself here? How are you getting involved in the community? What are you doing outside of school? So although I did spend some of my weekends with you, tell us about, what you did outside of school, whether it was weekends or evenings, other activities that you were involved in. How did you become immersed in the community?
Sure. So weekends, Bogota has a lot to offer in terms of museums and attractions and things to do. It's a really lively city, so I'll pretty much speak to Bogota. But weekends was usually adventuring, so trying to go to the historical sites, going to museums, trying to learn as much as possible about the city, whether that was by myself or with other volunteers like Brooke. We always tried to make sure we were seeing each other and staying connected. So I was mostly exploring the city. I did very little outside travel on the weekends, just because of the nature of my schedule. So I wasn't really traveling on the weekends. A friend of mine who was working with me, a volunteer, she decided to participate in a big sister, little sister program. So on the weekend she was spending time with her little sister, and so she would do fun things with her. So she found different ways to get involved with the community by joining up with that program specifically. But there are a lot of different ways to stay engaged, whether that's within your school community or just staying within Bogota and learning about it.
Awesome. It's also good to note on that note that you could be placed near other volunteers. You might be 30 minutes away from the closest one, or even an hour, hour and a half, or further. Obviously, we do have a lot of volunteers in Colombia, so you will be closer to a larger group. We have some countries where you might be more on your own. But this is definitely an independent experience, I would say. And you do have to make that effort to go see your friends and to have that connection from home. But then it's also equally important to make that connection in your own community. It could be a small pueblo. I lived in Chia, which is a small town right outside of Bogota, and it probably took me an hour and a half at times to get to the closest volunteer, even though it was maybe only 15 miles away, not even. All right, awesome. So Bridget, if you remember your days as a volunteer, and I know that you were also in a smaller pueblo, would you tell us about where you were placed, what you were, how you were keeping yourself busy on the weekends, how it was for you to kind of stay in touch with other volunteers, etc.?
Yeah, I was in a town called Tabio, which is even smaller than Chia, up outside of Bogota. And it really was the perfect placement for me because during the week I was the only volunteer in town, the only volunteer at my school. So I could focus on my students, put a lot of work into my lesson plans. I tutored some students outside of school. I tutored some of their siblings. But it was really just kind of quiet during the week, and then I spent all my weekends in Bogota. I would either go in to see some other volunteers. It took me about an hour and a half on buses. So yeah, the same thing. We would go on day trips. We would go exploring. Just kind of sit down and talk about the crazy things that happened all week. So I'd be visiting them, and I also joined a rugby team about halfway through the year. And that was a really great way to meet Colombians. I ended up making great friends that I still keep in touch with, and I still visit there in Bogota. So that was the extent of my outside school.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, now monthly stipend. I know that money is a question for everybody. So again, this is an approximate number of what you make monthly. It could be like 500,000 pesos, Colombian pesos, which is, the reality is that you're making essentially what other local Colombian teachers are making, or what the majority of people in the country are making. And they might be supporting a family, and even on less money than you are. And so I wanted to ask our panelists how you guys budgeted for that and how you felt, getting by. Bridget, I know that the cost of living on the coast is different than the interior, so perhaps you could address that, on average, how the volunteers on the coast feel with this stipend, and then Maria Antonia, I'll have you answer.
Yeah, I think everyone starts to feel it towards the end of the month, but generally the cost of living is quite low out here, and we calculate the stipends pretty carefully. So we calculate exact bus travel to and from school, and average grocery costs. And honestly, going to the grocery store and buying fresh fruits and vegetables, it's quite affordable here. It's when you start to buy imports, volunteers, you can't really afford to go out on your stipend. You can't afford to go out and get Juan Valdez twice a week. So I think most people have been living quite comfortably. They've been fine with their stipends. And you just realize what you can spend and what you have to use your savings for.
Perfect. Maria Antonia, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, toward the end of the month, you start really feeling that you're scrounging for money pretty much, but basically that stipend covers just your transportation daily and your groceries. So, you know, you can't really buy Nutella or peanut butter anymore. Those are things that are kind of cut out from your grocery list. So if you're just sticking to, you know, vegetables and fruits and, you know, just like normal, healthy, everyday kind of groceries, then you'll be fine. You also should take into consideration putting minutes on your phone. You have to pay maybe weekly or monthly to put minutes on your cell phone. Maybe you can go out and get coffee, you know, once a week, or maybe go out to a nice lunch or dinner once a week, or, you know, twice a month, something like that. But yeah, you kind of have to just kind of realize what your situation is and where you're living and, you know, your lifestyle. If you want a gym membership, how you're going to pay for that, whether that's with your savings and what you bring with you. So you just have to be very conscientious of how you're spending your money and how you're going to allocate all of your funds.
Absolutely. It's also good to say that, you know, a lot of the schools where you're working, you might get some tinto, you might get coffee there, or a bit of breakfast or lunch. These are not guarantees, but it happens con frecuencia, like frequently. And then, you know, you put yourself out there. The more Colombian friends you have, the more free lunches you will get invited to at their family's house, because people are so excited to have you in their home and to teach them English and to learn from you and to teach you about their country. So it's just like college. You will go anywhere for that free food, so you really need to work that. Okay, now to a very serious question, safety. I think this is something that everybody thinks of when they hear Colombia. I know I did. I know my family did when I told them that I was moving there. I put up a kind of, I don't know, a sentence to fill the void, if you will, because how do you respond to safety? How do you put it in words? You really can't. But I think it's safe to say that Colombia is definitely at a peak in terms of their, you know, social growth and their safety and their economy and everything. But that being said, there are always risks. There are risks there. There are risks here. This is the world we live in. I know last year when I was on my way back home from work, I got a phone call from my field director, and she said, "Brooke, I know you're from Boston, so I had to let you know that there was a bombing at the Boston Marathon." And meanwhile, I'm in Colombia, supposedly the most dangerous country in the world, and my hometown, a supposed safe place, was bombed. So I think it's all relative. It's what you prepare. It's how you prepare yourself. And the situations that you put yourself in. So as I wrote here, and this is very true, I'd say the most common threat against volunteers and Colombians is theft. This is unfortunate to say, but I have many more Colombian friends that have had many more things stolen than the volunteers did last year. But on that note, things definitely do get stolen anywhere in the world, especially on school grounds. Let's see. I know, Bridget, because you oversee so many volunteers, do you want to say anything towards, you know, how you would describe the safety on the coast, and like what measures you take personally, and also that the volunteers should take to ensure their safety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as you've been saying, it's no different from anywhere else in the world. I'd say out of all of the cases we've had, I've never heard of something happening in Colombia that I wouldn't, you know, hear about in Boston, in somewhere in Europe, in any city in the world. So safety is really just a matter of using common sense, being a little paranoid. You don't carry your passport when you walk down the street. You don't carry your credit cards. You know, keep money in a purse, keep it zipped, or guys, keep it in your front pocket. Don't walk around with expensive headphones on. Just general safety, you know, if you see a dark alley or a street that looks kind of shady at night, you don't walk down it. letting people know where you are, and most importantly is talking to Colombians, talking to the people where you live at your school, and asking them, you know, what's safe, what's not safe, where should I go, where should I avoid, things like that. But a lot of the cases of mostly robbery is what we've seen, and a lot of times it's people kind of letting their guard down, like they say here, dando papaya. That's when you're walking around the street and you pull out your iPhone to check the time and someone rips it out of your hand. And like we've said, that can happen anywhere. So it's really just a matter of being careful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Maria Antonia, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I have seen Colombia transition from pretty bad violence until pretty petty violence, at least within the cities. I was a victim of being pickpocketed on a bus and, you know, just reached into my bag. I had no clue and they took my, like, chapstick. So that was the worst case scenario for me, but it's just being completely aware of where you're going, knowing how to use the transportation system, you know, not just walking around aimlessly, scared that you're lost. You have to walk with a purpose and with a direction, whether you know where you're going or you don't know where you're going. You know, we kind of joked about it when we were volunteers, but you kind of had to look like you were mean mugging, you know. You had to not show anyone any vulnerabilities or that you were out of place because people take advantage of that. Again, whether you're in Bogota or in New York City. So it's just being constantly aware of your surroundings, and as Bridget said, dando papaya, you shouldn't be taking your cell phones out, your wallets out, or anything that you're scared would be taken, because people will just grab it and run away. So I think that's pretty much the only thing that you should be concerned about if you're going to Colombia. You shouldn't be really concerned if, you know, the FARC are going to come get you, because that's not really a reality.
No, yeah, that's good to note. Yeah, I would agree with everything that you guys said. On a personal note, I had my entire family come visit me last year, including my 88-year-old grandmother, and I was very concerned with everything we did and everywhere we walked. And before they came to visit, I said, these are the rules you have to follow. You have to bring a certain kind of bag that you keep in front of you all the time. Nobody is bringing any of their iPhones or any of that stuff. Of course they brought it anyways, and I yelled at them, but they were, I'd say, the most kind of impressed as to how comfortable they were on the streets. But that's what happens is when you're not expecting something, or you're too new to an area, or you're so comfortable that you've been there so long, you think you own the place and you think that you know what's going on, and you put your guard down, that's when things happen. So I like what you said, Bridget. You always have to have a bit of healthy paranoia. I remember you saying that to us during orientation, and it stuck with me the whole year. And if that means taking a cab ride for, you know, 10 blocks instead of walking, then that's what you do. A note on cabs, because this is something I wish I had known before going to Colombia. This is, I'd say, the only thing, this is what will set you up for success or failure. In Colombia, or in certain parts of the country, especially in the major cities, you have to call for a cab. You call the cab company, it's registered, therefore the cab driver is safe from the person getting into the cab, from the passenger, and also the passenger is safe from the cab driver. I know that that might sound kind of scary, but that is the reality of South America. And all you have to do is call for that cab, and then boom, everything is done, and it's completely safe. And that's unfortunately an incident that could happen in many places in Europe as well, and definitely places in South America. It does not happen in the U.S., but that is one thing that I wish I had known before I got there. So safety is in your hands. You can absolutely make Colombia a very safe place. I lived in Miami prior to going to Bogota, and my house and my car were broken into. And most of that was probably because I assumed I was safe, and it was a false assumption. So as long as you're smart about it, then everything is fine. Ladies, anything else on that note? Because I think it's really important. I'd say we're good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I've received a couple questions on living like placements, that sort of thing that I'm going to address before we go on to the next slide. Okay, so I did receive a question about traveling with friends or traveling or you know, participating with friends or partners, couples, etc. So it's definitely a possibility that couples, or it can be guaranteed that couples, you know, if both people are accepted, of course, that they can be placed together, they can live together, and friends can live close by as well. So that is something that can be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So it's definitely worth inquiring into further. And then I had a couple questions on teaching, so I think we might get right into that. Let me just take a look at this question here. One second. Somebody was asking about how they receive their monthly stipend. So it's a great question. We could go into further afterwards, but everybody has a bank card, a debit card, and everyone has a bank account that you open with the assistance of the field directors during orientation. And that's when every month money is deposited into your bank account, and then you can withdraw it just like you do in the States or in North America. You can also use that bank card as like a debit card, but you might incur fees for that. So you can we can talk about that further. Okay, I had a question about placements in Cartagena. Cartagena is not going to be receiving volunteers in January, but Bridget, will they be having volunteers in June?
Brooke, I think it's a little early on to do that.
You're right. I've been in America for too long. You're right. Okay, that's the answer to the question is things happen at the very last minute. Okay, you're right.
We hope so. We hope so.
Awesome answer. Good, good. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the most important, teaching. That's why we're all here. That's what we're doing. We're not traveling. We're not just visiting. We are teaching. We are working. It is hard work. Right, ladies?
Definitely.
Okay, so
Very
first
hard
off,
work.
yes, very hard work. So first off, I'm sure most of you are thinking, I've never taught before. How am I going to know what to do? What am I doing here? So we take our training, our orientation very, very seriously. I would say that orientation is the reason why I was successful in Colombia and the reason why I still work for WorldTeach today. I am a huge believer in training. I've done some job skill training in the past before joining WorldTeach, and that one-on-one skill training is what enables you to succeed in your own job, and to give that to somebody is extremely important and also a luxury. So I'll quickly kind of touch on our orientation. So when you first get to the country, you have 3 to 4 weeks of orientation. So that's when you're with your whole group. You have teacher training sessions every day. So that's including writing a lesson plan, creating assessments, the most important classroom management, analyzing the local education system, because teaching 6th grade in Colombia is very different than teaching 6th grade in China or in the United States. So at the end of the teacher training, the volunteers will then complete a short teaching practicum. So you're going to actually teach. You'll be practicing teaching while you still have your field staff with you to kind of help you through it. And those first few days are tough, and I remember having moments that I was really up and moments that I was really down, thinking this is extremely difficult. Also during orientation, we do language immersion. So every day you're going to have Spanish class, because I'm sure you're wondering, well, what if my Spanish isn't good? You do not need to know Spanish. That will not hurt you or help you on your application. The majority of our volunteers do not know the language before arriving in country. Of course, we encourage you to, once accepted in the program, to pick up that book and start, because it will help you personally. But as a teacher, it will actually probably hurt you, because you don't want to depend on the local language in the classroom. So we do help you during that first month orientation, and then immersion happens once you're in your placement, and it's sink or swim. And honestly, you won't be able to sink, because that would mean like not existing. You will be living, breathing Spanish, and eventually one day you might even be dreaming in Spanish, and that is a beautiful thing. So also during this orientation, we give volunteers a curriculum that's been designed here in my office, a curriculum designed specifically on teaching in Colombia. So, you know, things are going to be different, like I mentioned. A curriculum is a very cultural creation. So, you know, educational values are different. Just life priorities are different, and that definitely comes through in the curriculum. So that's designed, you know, for every grade level that we teach at, and that's given to the volunteers in case that curriculum doesn't already exist at your school. Some of the schools that we work at will have that, and some won't. And it's, you know, what are you going to bring to it? Are you going to offer your English department to help them with their existing curriculum, fill in the voids, help them with games, etc.? Or maybe you're going to be starting from scratch. So it's a good variety. So each volunteer, last point on orientation, each volunteer is also assigned what we call a teacher quality coordinator, who's based here in my office. And so you're in touch with that person monthly to review lesson plans. They provide you with additional materials if you're looking into, you know, teaching certain grammar issues that you're struggling with, or just additional teaching resources. And so then after that month-long training, you go into your placement. So now everybody, as we know, will be teaching English in all different levels. We teach in elementary, middle, high school. As Maria Antonia mentioned, we do teach in some college settings. It's usually like a community college, or, you know, they work with perhaps low-income students, etc. But full-time teachers in all of these placements. And you're going to be working for essentially 25 hours a week in the classroom. You could be on campus on school grounds for a full 40 hours because, you know, you'll be planning lessons, you could be doing additional activities, getting involved in other groups on campus, but it is 25 hours in the classroom. And a listener wrote in wondering, you know, what is the daily life like in school? How about Maria Antonia? Will you tell us what your just average day was like at the university?
Yeah, sure. So mine was a little different than, you know, school systems, I guess, in the sense that I taught 4 classes a day, so I was in at 7 a.m. and could finish by 1 p.m. If you're maybe at a colegio, at a school or high school, you might have a stricter schedule in the sense that you have to be there at 7 and have to leave by 3:30, 4, or 5. It's all really dependent on your placement. But, you know, I had maybe, 25 hours of teaching, but I also had additional hours where I had to have office hours, tutoring hours, consulting hours, and also grading. So I would push that number, at least in my situation, up to maybe upwards to 40 to 50 hours a week. But I was kind of like a freak obsessed with like doing all these things for my center, for my department. So that was kind of what my situation was because I was at a university, so I had a little bit more flexibility in terms of my, I guess, my afternoons and mornings.
Awesome. Bridget, what about yourself back when you were in Tabio?
In Tabio, I was teaching at like a K through 11 school, a regular colegio. And I was teaching middle school and high school. So I would go in at 6:45 every day and spend the whole day there. I was a full-time teacher, so I spent all day on campus, and I would leave 3 or 3:30. And I would usually teach 2 or 3 classes a day, you know, depending on the day, and have a free period or 2. Plus, like, recess duty, we would eat lunch. My free periods, I was usually talking to students or grading or planning lessons.
Awesome. And could you quickly talk about the class size and resources that you had in Tabio versus what most of the volunteers have on the coast of Colombia?
Sure. I was really lucky in Tabio in that I had small classes. My largest class was probably I think 32 students, and my smallest was 15 students. And my school was really basic. We had holes in the roof as well, and the chairs were really old. The computers were pretty old. There was no Wi-Fi, things like that. But I did have a textbook. There were whiteboards. If I needed a projector, I had access to that. We had speakers. So there was a decent amount of resources and materials. The school's on the coast. As far as class size, it's most likely going to be 40 students per class in every age level. The classes are enormous, sometimes up to between 35 and 45 is the average. And there are a good amount of materials and resources. Some schools have textbooks, some do not, but they all have whiteboards, they all have some sort of audiovisual materials. Maybe it's a room that you have to sign out. Maybe some schools even have donations of laptops. Each student has, you can rent out the laptops for the class, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on the school, but the classes are enormous, and it's very, very hot. Even if there's air conditioning, it is exceptionally hot.
That's very, very important to note. Yeah, I think everyone's getting a sense at how varied the different regions are. So again, you have your coast placements, so that's going to be Barranquilla, Isla Bardu, and then your interior, so Bogota, Medellin, right? Those are the major, I think I hit them all. Yeah. And yes, the culture is completely different, so actually I was going to have you address that in just a bit, Bridget. Okay, so now, Maria Antonia, what would you say was, what would you say was the biggest cultural challenge in the classroom for you?
A lot of these students aren't really used to structure and homework. The way that education is set up in Colombia, homework isn't really a part of their day-to-day or quizzes. So I think one of the hardest parts was trying to find a balance of introducing my students to the way we do things in the States in terms of being on time to class, being accountable for your homework, things like that, and then also trying to make it adaptable to their cultural framework too. So that was kind of hard. Communication in terms of how are we going to resolve why you didn't bring your homework, or just having these communication situations with my students about their expectations and my expectations. And it's a really steep learning curve, and you just kind of have to learn by trial and error. But it's just the way that students are used to their classroom setting, and then when an American or Westerner comes in and has all these kind of strict and more rigid ways of handling things, they can kind of clash a little bit. But you just start adapting to fit both of those cultural, I guess, norms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll write a personal note on that. I remember when I first started back at the school in maybe February, all of I think it was 8th grade, all of the students were thrown into one classroom so that the department head, whose own English was questionable at times, so that she could designate the student's level, so whether it was going to be basic, intermediate, or advanced. I have never seen such a labeling process as I did there. I would say in the States, we are very quiet about grades. We are quiet about your level. And in Colombia, it's the exact opposite. So everybody was in one room. There were probably 75, 80 kids, and my department head went student by student saying, okay, Andres, you're beginner. Jose, you were beginner last year. I'm knocking you up to intermediate. Maria, you were intermediate last year, and you fooled around in class, and I'm sending you back to beginner. This was in front of everybody for an hour. And the kids were actually okay with it, whereas I was the one that was completely uncomfortable and secondhand embarrassment. I think, Maria Antonia, I think that was a term that you used quite often last year, and it was very, very true. But you know what? While I was the one feeling uncomfortable, They weren't, because it's their culture. It's their culture for their students, for their teachers to read out their grades in front of their entire class. And we can go there and judge those people, but we shouldn't, because at the end of the day, you have this opportunity to recognize the differences and perhaps where one system is faulting, where the other one is succeeding. And to be honest, I know that the communication is very difficult, as you were saying, Maria Antonia, but communication between teachers and students in Colombia, I would say, is more open there than in this country, because there's just less barriers. There's less secondhand embarrassment, and there's more just like, this is the real deal and this is right in your face, and they're okay with it. That was just my opinion, though. Okay, I'm going to quickly address co-teaching because we're getting to the 8 o'clock hour. And then I'm going to answer some unopened questions from our listeners. Okay, I was a co-teacher last year in Bogota, and a lot of our placements are co-teaching, and that's at the request of the school. And it was pretty amazing and also extremely challenging. I think I defined it as me having like 8 spouses, and I had to make every one of them happy. It took a lot of work, but at the end of that year, I had 8 best friends, and I can say that confidently, and I'm still extremely close with them. And I'd say that I preferred co-teaching because I learned from them what it means to teach and how to teach, because I recognize that I'm not a trained teacher, and they learned from me how to improve their English, because again, the reality was we're teaching in schools that the English teachers don't speak great English. And I spent every single day with these people. I was in their classroom, and then I had private tutoring sessions with them once every 2 weeks. So at the end of the year, I may have been leaving, but their English was better because of me, and that's obviously much more sustainable. So co-teaching can be very difficult. You really have to address it very lightly, because you're kind of like the visitor in these people's classrooms, and that is a very bad title to have. You need to make yourself known in the classroom, but of course you can't like step on people's toes. So it's a fine line, and that's something that we address during orientation, and I could talk about it passionately forever. So if anybody wants to talk about that like later, please tell me and I'll give you a call, because co-teaching is an incredible model, but it's also very, very difficult. We had so much fun in the classroom. I think it's much more dynamic. Even in high school, I had a couple, back when I was in high school, I had 2 teachers in an American Studies class, and it was by far the most memorable class I've ever had. So I think it can be done really well, but you have to be overly communicative with the other teacher. And you also need to know when to step back and when to voice your concerns. So it's a balance. And flexibility, as we've been discussing all night, that is definitely the theme. Do you ladies agree? Everybody needs to be flexible and resourceful.
Absolutely, yes. Flexibility, you can't have enough of it in this country. And the most successful volunteers are the ones that come in very flexible, very open-minded, and just kind of let the experience shape itself rather than trying to change things to fit their expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be so much flexibility. I mean, when I first came into my placement, they didn't know what to do with me. It was a first-year placement. They were going to have me teaching Italian, and so you just have to roll with the punches, kind of, and be flexible, and be like, all right, how am I going to fix this? How can I do things differently, or communicate about certain issues? And so you have to be so flexible and also really resilient. You can't let situations there get to you and get under your skin. You just have to kind of bounce right back up and try to do better the next day or whatever it may be. So flexibility and resilience and creativity are probably the 3 things that volunteers really, qualities volunteers really need to be successful.
Absolutely. But on that note, you will not be teaching Italian, right?
Yeah, definitely not. That was just a really weird case for me.
But that's absolutely the reality, is that sometimes crazy things happen, and nobody's gonna be teaching Italian. You know, nobody's role as a volunteer is going to be abused. But if you're teaching, for example, in other countries, we have some volunteers that teach math and science. And when people find out that this is a native English speaker, they're like, oh my God, will you come and tutor this group as well? Or will you help teach our teachers English? And those are the sorts of things that can obviously be worked out, whether as part of your, you know, your role, your contracted role, or just an outside activity. And on that note, applicants, volunteers, a listener did write in saying, you know, can you tutor other students? Absolutely. I was tutoring administrators outside of my school, and also a friend that I made in my community. And all of these people were then teaching me Spanish. So yes, you can get involved in so many ways, whether it's through an adult education center. We had volunteers volunteering at even like women's health centers. So yes, the opportunity is there for you to make this what you want it. You can take all of your passions, whether it's dance, art, music, education, and you can find outlets for it because people are so excited to learn from you. Okay, we're moving on to almost the last slide. This is very quick. Let me start by saying our Colombia program, as I mentioned, is one of our most competitive. So we already have over 20 people confirmed for our, yes, Bridget, you're right. Thank you so much. Everything that you're doing outside of school, like I was tutoring those administrators, that was because they were giving me Spanish lessons. That was not for money. We went and got coffee together, and we spoke in English and Spanish, and yes, there's no extra money being made on this volunteer visa. Okay, guys? Very important to note. So thank you, Bridget. Okay, so Colombia, this is one of the most competitive programs, if not the most competitive program we have. We have over 20 volunteers already confirmed for January departure, and probably only 35 placements max. As we know, things change. They could increase that number. They could even drop that number by a few. So if you are in the process of completing your application, finish it now. Absolutely. This is, I'd say, an experience that, you know, changes you forever. And once you start this application, do not wait on it. I sat on mine for 2 years. And finally I said, I have to do this now, otherwise I'll regret it. So don't regret it like I almost did. So on this screen, you'll see the requirements. We are sending only native English speakers that are graduates of college with a bachelor's degree in any field. You do not have to have taught before. You do not need to know Spanish. You just need to be flexible and open to this learning process, because every teacher becomes a student, and every student is definitely a teacher as well. Much more so when you're in another country, because you're just learning on every corner, on every opportunity. So all of this information is on our website. The application process is done online as well. We are accepting applications until October 15th. I've also listed here our April 15th deadline for our June departure. And it's a year program, so you return in December, right before Christmas. Okay, I'm just going to address a couple more questions that we've received. And I also have a great picture here of Maria Antonia. She is sitting alongside our friend Diana. They're overlooking Bogota on a beautiful sunny day.
Beautiful picture.
You're so welcome. It's not always so sunny. It's not always so warm, but there are moments when the sun shines and you are like, this land is the most beautiful land in the world. I'm getting a little too emotional. Yeah. Somebody asked about teaching on Saturdays. I do know that there were a couple volunteers that had to go in for like teacher parent meetings on Saturdays, but that was very rare. That happened maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the whole year. But traditionally, nobody will be working on Saturdays. let's see, I addressed the question on friends being placed together. Somebody else asked about orientation. Where is it held? So I wish I had a picture of the finca, the farmhouse where we were staying, but it was, at least in previous years, it has been held in a small town outside of Bogota, in a beautiful little farmhouse, and everybody was there together. So people fly into Bogota regardless of whether you're going to be living in Medellin or on the coast. So you fly into Bogota, you have orientation for that month, and then WorldTeach flies you or drives you back to your placement, whether that's 15 minutes down the street like where I was, or a plane ride away. So that's a great question. Those details can change, but traditionally these days our orientation is held in Bogota because for many reasons, but that's where the majority of our volunteers will be. Throughout the year, we have additional training sessions, and that ends up being focused in the region where you are. So if you're on the coast, you will stay on the coast for example, mid-service conference. If you live in the interior, you will stay there for mid-service conference. And then at the end of the year, everybody returns to Bogota together, where it all started, for a little love and crying session as you prepare to depart what has been a very challenging and beautiful and changing year for everybody. All right, let me just take one last look at all of the questions. If anyone else has any last questions, please write in. For example, dress code. That's a great question. Pants are definitely okay for women. Colombia is a very, traditional country, a very Catholic country, but it's also very, very modern. So, our volunteers dress nicely at school, but you can wear pants. Any other questions, or ladies, any other comments? I think we're doing good, and we're 5 minutes past the hour. So yes, we are accepting applications for the June departure. We already have people confirmed for that departure. As I mentioned, Colombia is by far our most popular and competitive program. So yes, get your applications in now, absolutely. And last question, most volunteers don't co-teach. Bridget, could you put like a percentage on that? Like, I know it varies completely by placement, but I wouldn't say that most volunteers co-teach, correct?
It's probably about 50-50.
Okay.
But even if you're not co-teaching, you're still going to be working very, very closely with other teachers at your school, whether they're English teachers or homeroom teachers or administrators. So the idea of co-teaching and the culture of co-teaching is going to affect everyone.
Awesome. Yep, definitely. And in my opinion, again, that's the most beneficial for you as the volunteer, for your teachers as teachers, and it's just much more sustainable. Okay, final question. So how long after you submit your application will you find out if you've been accepted? Usually it's about 2 to 3 weeks after the application is complete. So it's kind of a quick turnaround. And also, during that process, once you are accepted into the program, that's when we get you in touch with additional alumni who, in addition to the 3 of us, love talking about Colombia, what we call country experts. So actually, Maria Antonia, you are a country expert, and we have lots of alumni who are available to answer more questions. I also am available to answer more questions, so I'll send you all my contact info, and we're here to address those questions. So best of luck in your applications, and thank you to our panelists, to Bridget and Maria Antonia. You guys have been extremely helpful. And everybody, thanks so much for listening. So see you nos vemos en Colombia. Have a good evening. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't get to that picture.
Are we still on?
We are, but I'm ending it now. Good night. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.